Good day, and welcome to our first midweek SAJBD COVID update. So every Wednesday at 12 noon at this time, I'm going to give you an update of where we are with the COVID pandemic. And then secondly, after that, try and answer many of the questions which you have sent in. And thank you very much for sending these questions in. So I'm going to go straight away to a slideshow. Yeah. Right, this is the general dashboard of where we are. It gives you the kind of raw figures, the cumulative cases up to now, just over 2 million cases, 192,000 of which are still active cases. The cumulative fatalities, although this is probably a little bit low, not a little bit, it's probably quite low. The MRC estimates it should be about 2 or 3 times this figure. And then what we do look is the daily change. Now, this does, of course, fluctuate over a week, and what's probably a more accurate figure of how it's changing, I'll show you just now in the graphs. But this is where we are globally. South Africa is about 18th in the world in terms of the total number of cases. But also if you look at the cases per million population, and also if you look at the deaths per population, we're about 18th in the world, behind some of these European countries, cumulatively, of course, up to now. Of course, our epidemic started a little bit later after compared to theirs, compared to Italy, Spain, and so on. But more importantly, let's look at where we are in terms of the waves. So you will recall that the first wave was in the winter of last year. That was due mainly to the original strains of the virus. And then in the summer of end of last year, beginning of this year, remember we had our second wave, which was largely driven by the beta variant of the virus. I'll come just now to explain what these variants mean. And then now, of course, we're in our third wave, which is driven by the Delta variant. So if we superimpose these waves one on top of each other, we can see that, in fact, our third wave is really the most severe wave of all. We are now topping just under 20,000 cases per 100,000 population, topping the 19,000 per 100,000 population of the second wave. And this is largely driven by the Gauteng province. You can see that Gauteng is much more, probably about 60% of all the cases in the country at the moment are in Gauteng. But there is a differential between the various provinces, as you can see over here. So each province really has its own particular kind of characteristic as the virus kind of moves through the country. And we saw this with the first wave and the second wave, that it starts in one of the regions of the country and then spreads. So this is where we are, the third wave here. Over here, you can see that it's considerably higher than the first and second waves in Gauteng. The only other province at the moment where the third wave is exceeding the first and second wave is the Northern Cape. Yeah. The other provinces are still climbing. They're still developing their third wave. We can see this, so for example, in the Western Cape over here, climbing towards the to overtake the second wave, which it probably will do, as we've seen in Gauteng and we've seen in the Northern Cape. And this is the figure in the Eastern Cape, a little bit below and still developing. Interestingly enough, because the second wave, the Eastern Cape was one of the first provinces to be mainly affected, and then spreading, the Eastern and the Western Cape, in fact, and spreading upwards to the inland provinces. This third wave is a little bit the other, bit of the kind of reverse of that, mainly, as I said, affecting Gauteng and then spreading to other provinces. KwaZulu-Natal still developing, probably in the earlier stages of the third wave. So if we go back to our Gauteng, we can see that it has inflected, the curve is inflected and starting to come down. So in Gauteng and the Northern Cape, we have really kind of reached the peak of the third wave, starting to come down. but of course, very much high activity, intense activity, particularly in Gauteng at the moment. So what's driving this? As I mentioned earlier, this is the Delta variant over here. There are 4 variants of what we call variants of concern. These are variants which do have properties which make it which give us a degree of concern, a degree of worry. Each one has its own particular problem. The Alpha variant is the variant which has been found originally in the United Kingdom, sometimes called the Kent variant, but it's spread really mainly to the Northern Hemisphere countries. In fact, this is the most widely spread variant up to the Delta, which I'm going to come to just now. But up to now, this has been the main variant, mainly in the Northern Hemisphere, but also in many countries in Europe and America and Asia and so on. The Beta variant was a variant which dominated South Africa and Southern Africa. And its problem was that it was relatively resistant to vaccines. What you call it escaped the immunity which was elicited by vaccines. And that was a big problem because it restricted our choice of vaccines to the 2 vaccines which we're using now, the Johnson & Johnson and the Pfizer vaccine. The Gamma variant is one which hasn't spread that widely in the world. It was found first in Brazil, it spread to a number of South American countries and Central American countries, but it hasn't spread widely beyond that. And now we have the Delta variant. This is characterized by being the most infectious variant, the most contagious variant of all. In fact, the Delta variant is probably about 60% more contagious than the Beta variant. If we compare it to the previous strains, it's probably about double as contagious as the original ancestral strains, the ones before these variants. How do we kind of characterize, how do we understand these variants? Well, there's a network of the virology laboratories around the country, a network of 7 laboratories, which are constantly monitoring by genetic characterizing of the virus, these various variants, or what you call strains, sometimes called lineages, just to confuse everybody. But I'll stick to the term variants. And they're constantly monitoring the variants. And these are virology laboratories throughout the world. There's a repository in the United States which characterizes all variants around the world and then classifies them into these various labels, alpha, beta, gamma, and so on. And there are the variants of interest, which are the initial ones, which don't have yet characterized these very sinister problems, and then the variants of concern, which I mentioned just now. So we are now in the throes of the Delta variant. And this shows you in this graph over here, up to now, these yellow bars indicate the Beta variant, which dominated from the latter part of last year until very recently, until about the middle of May, towards the end of May. And then these green bars over here are the Delta variant. And this has really taken over in this country. It's really taken over globally because of its intensely contagious properties. It has overtaken all other variants and displaced all other variants to become the major variant in the world. And here you can see in South Africa, this epi curve, this epi week over here, 26, is the end of June, beginning of July. And you can see this in light green. This purple, blue purple was the Beta variant. This light green over here is the Delta variant. And this has now become the main variant in the country. Just a couple of words about the status of vaccines. So up to now, of course, South Africa has been relatively slow in the rollout compared to many other countries. It is a complex question, and I won't unfortunately have time to go into it now, but just to kind of update you where we are now, 4.5 million doses of vaccine have been administered so far in total. This is where we are as it's yesterday. Of these, just under 1 million doses of Johnson & Johnson vaccine have been administered. This is, of course, just one dose to give adequate immunity. And I'll come to there are a couple of questions which were asked about the Johnson & Johnson and boosters. I'll deal with that just now. And then we have the Pfizer vaccine, 3 million doses, 3 million individuals have received first dose. And of these 3 million, 540,000 have also received a second dose for a combination of 3.6 million. And that gives us our 4.5 million doses to date. So if you look at where we are as at yesterday, a total of 4.5 million have been vaccinated. Fully vaccinated, in other words, those who received the single Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and those who've received 2 doses of Pfizer vaccine. That's about 3.6% of the adult population over the age of 18, or if you look at the total population, 2.4%. So it's still very, very low, and we've still got a lot of catching up to do. Those who have been partially vaccinated, in other words, received 1 dose of Pfizer, that's about 7.7% of the adult population, 5.1% of the total population. And total vaccination, either received 1 dose of Pfizer or 2 doses of Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson, 11.3% of the adult population and 7.6% of the total population. So certainly it is considerably less than what you need to get to if you're going to look at population immunity. And just to wind up, because there's a lot of questions being asked, how effective are the vaccines that we're using up to now against the Delta variant, the one which is now our dominant variant? And this is probably about 90 to 95% of all strains of the virus are now the Delta variant. Remember, the Alpha variant was the one which is mainly found in the United Kingdom. And these are data which come from the United Kingdom, where they've looked at how effective these vaccines. AstraZeneca, which is used in the United Kingdom, we couldn't use it because of our Beta variant, but we are again looking at it because it is quite effective in terms of the Delta variant. But if we look at how effective these vaccines are in preventing symptomatic disease, in other words, any infection which gives you illness, and when talking about symptomatic, we really refer to mild or moderate illness. And this is the great majority of people that do get ill, are infected and get ill, will get mild to moderate illness. So with a Pfizer vaccine, which we're using, after 1 dose, not very effective in preventing minor illness, minor or mild or moderate illness. Similar figure to AstraZeneca, quite a bit less than with their Alpha virus, which we don't really get very much in this country. After 2 doses, however, the Pfizer is pretty effective against Delta, 88%. The AstraZeneca, 60%, again, somewhat less as compared to their Alpha virus. So against symptomatic disease, if you get 1 dose, you're not that well protected against mild illness. If you get 2 doses with the Delta virus, you're reasonably protected with the AstraZeneca, and you're pretty well protected with the Pfizer. Nevertheless, 88% means that 12% of individuals will still get mild infection, even with the Delta. By the way, with Beta, it's quite a bit lower than 88. It's more like 65% with the Pfizer against the Beta. But the Delta, which we now are facing, 88% is a pretty good figure. But really what we want to prevent is hospitalization. We want to prevent severe disease. And this is the one light at the end of the tunnel. This is the one thing which is a positive thing. And that's even after a single dose, after 1 dose of Pfizer, you're 94% protected against severe disease, hospitalization. And even with AstraZeneca, you're 71%, not quite as good, but not too bad, preventing against hospitalization. With 2 doses, it doesn't make too much difference. In fact, with the Pfizer, from 94 to 96, with the AstraZeneca, it does make quite a bit of difference. The AstraZeneca, with 2 doses, is going to be pretty effective to prevent the severe disease. And that's really what you want to get to, certainly in the early phases of the vaccination rollout, stopping people getting to hospital. So that's just basically where we are at the moment. And I'll now try and answer a number of the questions which have come up. I did get, and thank you very much, a lot of questions, but some of them I've actually grouped. And there are a number of questions which came up with regard to the Pfizer vaccine and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in terms of the interval between the first and second doses of Pfizer, how long after one has been ill can one get Pfizer, should one get Pfizer vaccine, and also if one had Johnson & Johnson vaccine, is it necessary to get one booster or two boosters? So I'll deal with those quickly. First of all, the interval. Now, the trials which were done with the Pfizer vaccine initially, there was a 3-week interval. And that's how the vaccine was registered with the FDA in the United States. And that's the interval which has been widely used in America, a number of countries in Europe and Israel and so on. In the United Kingdom, they decided to try a much longer interval. And that actually also is comparable to many other vaccines like the hepatitis vaccine and papillomavirus, where there's in fact a 6-month interval between the two doses. But the United Kingdom, they went for a 12-week interval. It's also something we're actually also going to look at here. The reason for that initially was to stretch the doses to immunize as many people as rapidly as possible. But what they did found is that the immune response was actually somewhat better with that longer delay period, 12 weeks. The one problem with 12 weeks is that sometimes people forget to come back again, and there's what we call drop-off. People only come for the first and not for the second vaccine. And that's why we decided to shorten it to 6 weeks. And that's the South African recommendation of 42 days. Now, as you can see, and this is what a number of the questions, does it matter instead of 6 weeks if you come 7 weeks, or you come 8 weeks, or 9 weeks, or 10 weeks, or even 12 weeks, or even longer? It's not going to make much of a difference. The only thing is, of course, you want to be better protected. And that's why you want to do it as soon as possible. And that's why 6 weeks is sort of a compromise between the 3 weeks and the 12 weeks. We are maybe also going to look at 12 weeks. It's being considered at the moment. At the moment, it still is 6 weeks. But the point of what I want to make is not to worry if you have to delay your second dose beyond 6 weeks. It's not going to make that much of a difference. Then related to that is another question. People that have had the either tested positive or have been ill with COVID, how long, well, first of all, they should get the vaccine, even though they've had COVID. And then how long after recovery from COVID should they get the vaccine? And our recommendation is 4 weeks. Again, it's not as strict if it's 5 weeks or 6 weeks. I think a minimum of 4 weeks, and not less than 4 weeks. But they should wait that 4-week period. The reason is that they anyway have an immunity after being ill, and this are sometimes the minor side effects if the vaccine is done too close to after recovery from COVID. So a good period is 4 weeks. If it's 5 weeks or 6 weeks, also not serious, but a minimum of 4 weeks. Then the related question to that is boosters for either Pfizer, 2 weeks, two doses, certainly going to give very optimal immunity. There really is no need for a third booster or a fourth booster and so on. Certainly not for a fourth booster, and also not for a third booster. There is some work which has been done in some countries like Israel, where they're looking at people whose immune system is compromised, who are in what we call immunosuppressed, either from illness or from drugs they're taking for cancer, for example. They may need a third booster because their immune system is suppressed, just to kind of, again, stimulate the immune system. But in this country, we have not adopted that policy as yet. And in fact, internationally, it's only being researched. It's not yet a policy anywhere as yet. With regard to the people that have had the Johnson & Johnson, should they get a booster? No, not really. It's not really necessary. We know that they get optimal an immune response after Johnson & Johnson, and getting a booster is not going to boost it very much. So it's not necessary to get a booster after the single dose, certainly not for this year. We are weighing up whether next in future we do need boosters, and probably will need boosters, but for the meantime, it's not necessary. Just related to that, how safe are you after vaccination? There have been a number of questions related to that. Certainly, you reduce your chances markedly of getting severe infection but not all that much in getting mild infections. So certainly while the Delta virus is running rampant through the country, and particularly in Gauteng, you really are strongly advised to take all the precautions. And I think there was one question about a doctor who wasn't wearing a mask while attending to patients. I find it difficult to understand, but certainly one should still wear masks, still have sanitized hands, still avoid functions, still avoid indoor gatherings and so on, even after being vaccinated. Not necessarily take an antibody test. The antibody test is a bit unreliable. Even if it's negative, it doesn't mean you're not immune. You are still immune. And I think I'll leave it at there. I'm running out of time. I'm sorry, there are many, many questions I didn't get to. I'll try and get to them and any other new questions in my next meeting next Wednesday at 12. So thank you very much. And please keep rolling in with the questions and queries. Have a good day.